A word of caution about this episode. In it, we talk about domestic violence, sexual abuse, and physical violence. If you have ever been the victim of domestic abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, or any kind of physical violence, you may find this episode triggering. Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to Off the Fence, a podcast where we deconstruct difficult decision-making to help us figure out what keeps us stuck, and more importantly, how do we get unstuck? I'm your host, Karen Covey, a former divorce lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator turned coach, author, and entrepreneur. With me today, it is my pleasure to introduce Dana Diaz. Dana studied journalism and psychology at DePaul University. She's also had lifelong experiences with narcissistic abuse. Thankfully, her education gave her the ability to accurately express how narcissistic abuse creates confusion and conflict within victims. Today, Dana is a proud voice for fellow victims who are unable, afraid, or too ashamed to share their experiences. She strives to create awareness and understanding to ensure victims are given the support they need to both understand their situation and heal from it. Dana's first book, Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse, chronicles her experience in an almost 30-year-long abusive marriage, as well as the healing and empowerment that she's experienced since then. Dana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. And I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with your backstory. And you said you had lifelong experiences with narcissistic abuse. And the reason I want to start here is because so many other people who are caught in the same cycle have similar backstories. So if you don't mind just jumping in and starting with your backstory, start wherever you want to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually in the process of getting a book together about my childhood because I think it was so important to understand how that led me into a marriage where I was experiencing a lot of the same things plus some. But generally, literally from the start, I was born to a teenage mother who didn't want me. And this was during a time, in the early 70s that it wasn't okay for teenagers to be unwed and have babies. And the added fact of her not wanting me, in fact, she had her tubes tied immediately after I was born. Going into that kind of life was a little hard. Now, my grandma and great grandma loved me very much, made her keep me, and they were wonderful. My great grandma especially holds a very special place in my heart. She was my true mother. But when my mother did find somebody and get married, she and her husband, decided it was time to take me and move to the suburbs, and away from everybody and everything I knew, which was hard enough. But the harder part of that was that my mother was always emotionally distant. I didn't feel any affection from her. It was almost neglectful. But I was okay, just go along with my life. When you're a kid, you're just trying to play with kids and be a kid and jump around and do cartwheels on the lawn, simple life.
Just to jump in for a second, how old were you at that point?
She got married when I was 7. She was seeing him since I was a year old. So we had already a pretty, long history. I mean, he's the only father figure I knew in my life. So the thing was, I never liked him, but I was a kid. So nobody bothers worrying about a kid's opinion of somebody. But he was left to take care of me in the mornings because my mother was working so much. They were trying to make ends meet and get their life together. That's just when things would start. And I feel like with narcissistic abuse, looking back, this is how it starts, is just these little things that end up being really big things, as time goes on. They just kind of push their boundaries a little more every time, to where you're always on the fence of like, okay, that's not right. And it feels wrong, but it's not so much that it could be taken either way, So it was little things like pulling too hard, making my pigtails in the morning, just generally being just nasty to me. But as time went on, as I got a little older, I'd say around middle school age, he was constantly calling me a whore. He'd drive me to dance class. I would be wearing a leotard for dance class and spandex leggings or something. And he would call me a whore. When I started experimenting with makeup, I looked like a whore. He was constantly telling me that nobody ever wanted me. I should have never been born. He shouldn't have to pay for another man's child. So all these things during a time where, it's hard enough being a kid, and especially a girl. I feel like, no offense against boys, I never was one, so I don't know, but I feel like girls are hit with so much. We're going through our bodily changes during that time. Our hormones are changing, and there's all these societal pressures about what you should look like and your body image and all these things, and your self-esteem is so crucial. So to have crushed that, neither one of them just ever gave me a chance. I felt as insignificant and unworthy and unlovable and all these awful things as they made me believe that I was. And even though I was strong-willed and even though I knew it was wrong, I had nothing else in the world telling me that they were wrong. So I believed it. And it's a hard way to go out into the world then, when you're seeking a partner.
Oh yeah, 100%. So fast forward to your own marriage.
Yes.
Once, did you have an idea before you married your husband?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I can answer that right now. Because I left my home. So this literally on my 18th birthday, bye, see you later. And nobody even tried to stop me. It had been to the point where I felt like I was pushed out. But looking back, I realize now there's a name for what I was, and that is codependent. I was a people pleasing. I will do anything if you like me, because I'm like a puppy that just wants a treat. Like, nobody has ever loved me. I'm pretty sure nobody will ever love me, because that's what I've heard my whole life. So please, somebody love me. Somebody just like me a little bit. Just give me a little nugget. Give me something. So yes, this guy walks into the real estate office I work at. I think I just turned 19, and I think he's a jerk. As a matter of fact, I am thinking he reminds me of my narcissistic stepfather who abused me. And there was physical abuse too. Like I said, it got so bad in my childhood. I need to go back to that. I was talking about pulling my pigtails too hard, but by the time I left the house, I'd been slapped, strangled, thrown downstairs. It got bad. Authorities were involved. So, I'm in a low place in my mind. So I think this guy's a jerk. He reminds me of my stepfather, who's done all these things to me. And talk about a red flag. But, one day he was nice to me. One day. And he's like, you want to hang out? Well, I had nothing better to do and nobody else wanted me. So I thought, why not? And it didn't go well. He spit beer on me. He was drunk. He was just, unfortunately, he was very aggressive sexually with my body. And he had gotten me so wet that I took off what I was wearing, which was dumb. You're dumb when you're young, forgetting that I didn't even have undergarments on or anything. So he took that as an invitation. That happened. Didn't want it to happen, but it did. I was a mess.
Oh my
but
gosh.
This man, by the end of this night, says, I love you, and wants me to stay, and says, it's the two of us against the world forever. So it's like a truck hit me. I'm like, okay, this is a lot real fast. Like, a lot happened I didn't like, and a lot's happening that I want to hear, but it's hard to but the mind space I was in, and that's what I want to express is, am I smarter than that? Oh, yes, I am. And I was then too. But when you are feeling in your head, that you aren't worthy of more than that and that you don't deserve better, you fall into these circumstances that, you can do dumb things, even if you're a smart girl. So I stick with this guy.
How did you go from there, though, to marrying? I mean, on some level, the red flags were going off. It sounds like you were aware of them, but you
Very,
still kept going. Why?
very, because there was nothing else in the world telling me that I was worthy of love except for this young man. And when he was nice to me, he was very loving, very affectionate, very sweet. We'd laugh. But boy, the angry outbursts, the punching the holes in the walls and crowbars and hockey sticks and the name calling, and but I didn't know any better. And I think the problem is that if you would have given me a nice boy to go on a date with, I wouldn't have known what to do with that. I think we tend to fall into what's familiar, and people say, I'd never let somebody do that to me. I'd never let somebody control me or manipulate me. But when your head is in a place where, again, you don't think you deserve better than that, and it's all you've ever known is that tension and that hostility, your body, I hate to say, it's almost like an addiction. You almost need it to feel like you're being loved. I mean, I had essentially learned to equate anger or violence and all these negative things with love, because if somebody was nice to me, I'd be like, you're boring. Like, you must not love me. And that's not, something that might make sense to somebody that grew up, in a home where they were supported and loved and encouraged and all this. But from the perspective of somebody who did not grow up in that way, all I can say is that's how it is. And fortunately, I'm better now in my 40s, but took a little time. But yes, I married this boy. Even on my wedding day, though, I remember when the wedding march played, I'm standing there panicking, thinking I should not be marrying him. We're just going to end up getting divorced. Like, I knew, and I didn't know what to do. I felt too embarrassed and too ashamed to run away.
Well, at that point, so you're at your wedding, you're thinking all these things before you're walking down the aisle. Did you have the traditional wedding? Everybody was there, all the things, or was it, could you pulled out? Okay.
Yeah. And I'm on the arm of my stepfather because I was told that I couldn't invite my biological father, or he couldn't have any part of the wedding. Otherwise, my mother and stepfather weren't going to pay, for whatever portion of this wedding, and they weren't going to come. So, here I am on the arm of somebody who abused me my whole childhood, ironically walking me down the aisle to pass me off to the next one. So,
wow. What is your, you mentioned your biological father. Did you have a relationship with him growing up?
I did not meet him until I was 16 years old. My grandma and great grandma did tell me that after I was born, he came around for my first year of life. I don't have memories of that, but he was very enthralled with me, very loving, very involved, despite being a teenage boy himself. He was only 16. But my mother, out of vengeful anger towards him, just put an end to that. She didn't want him having anything to do with me. And so I didn't see him again until I was pretty insistent when I was 16 that I wanted to meet that. I needed to know where I came from. And I think that's something that anybody who doesn't know a parent or who's been adopted, you do wonder, especially when you're in these circumstances where you're like, okay, like, I am actually being told I'm not part of this family. My stepfather would tell me that too. You're not a part of this family. You're not one of us. So it's like, I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be accepted with somebody. Like, where did I come from? And when I did first have that first phone conversation and then the first meeting in person with my biological father, it was instant. I mean, the instant we talked on the phone, it was like, it's an overwhelming feeling of like, now I know who I am. Like, now I know where I come from, because he and I, despite me not being raised by him, so much alike. I mean, our views on things, our sense of humor, everything. And it was amazing. But that got, squashed too, because, it's a typical narcissist thing. They can't have you feeling any joy or, having any happiness in your life. And so The phone calls were, I was being ridiculed for them. It was that, my mother and stepfather were making it more difficult for me to have those phone conversations or to see him. So, it was one of those casualties, as I call it, that I had to let it go to maintain peace. And that's basically what ended up happening in my marriage, especially after we had, my son, my ex and I had a son together. You just get to the point where you're not submitting because you're submissive, but you're so emotionally exhausted that you just want peace. And you're just like, Lord, fine, we'll just do it your way. That's fine. I'll do this that you want me to do, even though I don't want to do it, or this isn't right, but fine. I just settle down. You just do anything to appease them so that you don't have the consequences and that you don't have these angry things happening around your kids or around people.
Well, so you marry this guy, you have a son, you're in a relationship that it sounds like it's not going well. Was he physically abusing you at that point?
So here's the irony of the whole thing. He swung a crowbar at my head once. He swung a crowbar at the wall a few times, hockey sticks. Yes, he kept a knife next to him for years at the where he'd lay to watch TV in the living room. And I always said that knife was like my shock collar because it kept me in line without him having to use it because I didn't want to push him to the point. So did he ever lay a finger on me? No, but was there physical threat? Yes. And the worser part of it is by the end of, about a year before I finally filed for divorce, I had been very sickly to the point where I was experiencing about 24 random symptoms every day. I had dwindled down to 93 very skeletal pounds. I looked like a Halloween decoration. My hands were in so much pain and didn't work. I couldn't even tear toilet paper off the rolls sometimes. I mean, I would sit there and cry. In my early 40s, I can't even basically take care of my needs. It's a very sad place to be. And I went through all kinds of doctors, specialists, all these tests. Long and short of that, it was actually a sleep neurologist of all things. He got me with Mayo Clinic and they discovered I had so much cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone that's similar to adrenaline. Mm-hmm. So when you're very stressed out, it pumps through your system like adrenaline would if you're like fighting for your life. I had astronomically high amounts of cortisol pumping through my system for so long that my body thought it was trying to kill like a cancer or something and basically started killing itself. So all of my major organ systems were damaged. My white blood cells were depleted and all of these symptoms I was having were autoimmune issues. And at that very low point, he sat me down and said, your body's shutting down. You are on an oxygen machine because you can't breathe. But if your lungs aren't breathing, your heart's not beating. That's why you cannot move your muscles. That's why your vision's blurry because your brain's not working. And I mean, nothing was working. And he said, stress really can kill you. So you really need to think about your life and change your circumstances where you can, because all this toxic energy around you is literally killing you. So it was at that point that I realized this man didn't have to lay a hand on me in order to kill me. How about that? You don't think about those things. Yeah. So that's when I unfortunately, as I say in my book, that's when I realized that all this love that I had been looking for outwardly, I had to find it in myself and love myself enough to get over my religious beliefs and my promise to my son to stay in this marriage and, my noble efforts to try to make this work and keep nobody wants to get a divorce, but I had to save myself. I had to love myself enough to live. And so that's what I did.
So how did you do that though? Because it's hard. There's a whole mindset that goes along with having been abused for so many years, right? So you're in the doctor's office, you realize that your body is shutting down, that you have to change in order to survive. But
Yes.
how do you go from there to moving out and getting a divorce and essentially taking the steps you needed to take to save yourself?
Yes. I had a lot of, I guess I had put enough good juju in the universe or something that I had some things just fall in my lap as blessings. But it also took a lot of planning. And I should say, because I had always known, I kind of wanted out before I even got in it. I had always kept, like, when grandma sends you a birthday check or your mother-in-law, I just cashed it and put it away. I learned enough to keep a little safe that nobody knew about except for me, that I could hide. And I just hid cash in there. So I had several, lots of tens of thousands of dollars saved, because I needed to make sure, because also in narcissistic and probably a lot of relationships where men are very controlling, and I'm going to say women too, because it's not fair to say men, but if your spouse or partner is very controlling about money, this is financial abuse, where they don't allow you on their checking accounts or on credit accounts. These are the things that were happening to me, but he had access to all of my money. So I had to, in my mind, especially after I had my son, I had to make sure that if we had the opportunity to just walk out, and if my son would come with me, because when he gets to a certain age, I can't just carry him out. And he was a teenager at this point. I needed to make sure I had money for down payment on an apartment, or, wherever, that I had money for rent, for food, for all these things. So I had been planning for a long time, which was lucky for me, which I know a lot of people don't have that fortune. I was also very lucky. The irony is that I consulted, they say an abuse victim goes to an attorney 7 times or goes to 7 attorneys before finally filing. And ironically, I went to the 6th attorney early in 2020. And she gave me some things we had to do, because we had a little complication of living on a little farm. We had cows, we had pigs, so it's not just about me just walking out or him moving out. We had other live things that were assets that we needed to consider. So I had to kind of figure out those things, talk to some farmers, see if I could, and see if my husband would even sign the animals to anybody, or consider selling them. So there were things we needed to do. We go into the shelter in place for COVID a week after I talked to the attorney. So now I am locked in this house with this man. Mind you, at this point, he has sensed, because when you make that decision that you're done, you try to hide it, but they know it. So there was a lot of tension. So once the courts were, fortunately, right about when the courts reopened, I came home from work one day, and the house seemed strange. Like, I noticed something was different, but I didn't realize till I walked up to my office, by my bedroom, and saw that all the sheets, blankets, his closet, everything was cleared out. He had actually taken his stuff and moved out while my son and I were at work that day.
Wow. So, all right. So
Yes.
during all of this time, first of all, you go to the lawyer, you don't file, and then COVID hits, right? Lockdown hits. And then, but you had made the decision. That is so interesting that
Yes.
how long had you been, well, before we get to how long you'd been living with him, it sounds like you were actually still going to work, like you were leaving to physically go to work.
I could only work a little bit, if that makes any sense. I owned a housekeeping business at that point, so most people were not allowing me in during COVID, but there were we live in an agricultural area, so there were agricultural offices that were open that were considered essential, employers, so we could still clean for them. So I wasn't leaving the house much, but he wasn't working at all. So we were stuck in this house. My son was there. I moved actually to our basement because at this point he knew something was different with me. And there were a lot more threats coming through from him. And he was texting them to me, emailing them to me, even at one point saying this would be easier if one of us was dead. But the implication was he wanted me dead. And it's a very scary situation to be in. So I started I actually took one of these notebooks that my son had, at the end of the school year brought home that just had scribble on it. It was unsuspecting. So I tore out the used pages and was using that to keep track of the things that were being said and the things that were happening, because if something did happen to me, I wanted to make sure that people knew it was him. And I kept that hidden under my couch cushion in the basement there, where I basically took up residence. I slept on the sofa down there. I used the laundry room sink for brushing my teeth and sponge bathing myself, just to avoid being near him at all.
So how long did you live like that in the basement before you came home and found him gone?
April, May, 3 months.
Okay. And
3
then
months.
you come home, you find him gone. I would assume that at that point you file for a divorce, right?
Well, the courts were still closed. So they were just starting to reopen, but they were so backed up. So what I did while I was waiting was I tried, when he was in a good mood or on the days that he was trying to call me, hey, beautiful, you want to have dinner, trying to reconnect, because it's easier for me to just let him back in and go back to our old life. I would use those opportunities, as terrible as it sounds, to try to here and there just negotiate a little something as far as the house and living arrangements and money and things like this, like, well, what do you think about, you think we really need those cows? Should we think about maybe selling them? Just trying to work things out. But I was doing it also through email and through text. So I had it in writing. So by the time I called my 7th attorney, because my 6th attorney was so backed up from COVID, I found the 7th attorney. He said that if you have everything all worked out, I can get you divorced in 3 weeks. And I said, no problem. And I got everything. I just took him all the texts and emails, printed them out. We got the paperwork done within a day. And I asked him if I could present the paperwork instead of having the papers served. And it was very nerve-wracking for me to be in any space that wasn't my own territory, so to speak, with a man who did not want me alive. But he signed the papers. He didn't even balk at it. He didn't ask for any custody or any responsibility with our son. The only thing he was worried about were his firearms. He wanted to make sure that he was able to have his firearms.
When he left the house, did he take those with him or did you have them?
So I did not look. Honestly, I knew his main gun case was emptied. However, the very first day that my son and I were in the house alone, I had gotten home a little earlier that afternoon. My ex had put Ring doorbells on our door to notify his phone. He was spying on us. And I'm not good technologically. I'm just going to admit it. It made us very uncomfortable. So I got home early this next afternoon after he moved out, and it must have notified his phone, because within maybe 5-10 minutes of me getting home, I heard the door open. I turned around. I had left it unlocked. We live in country. Nobody, I would know if somebody was expected, but he walked in, didn't say one word, walked up the stairs to the bedroom, came back down carrying the handgun, walked out. And I knew he had purposely done that. He hadn't forgotten that gun. It was just like that knife. He was trying to make sure I knew he had the gun, because he didn't say one word. He just wanted to make sure that I knew. So, and just like the moving out, it was all for his pride, though. You know, it wasn't that he had to leave me because he knew I was getting ready to leave him.
So he comes back and he does that. And at that point, did you change all the locks and make sure that you were safe, or were you not able to do that
I
because
was not.
legally it's an issue?
It's an issue because our son, he knew who his dad, he knows who his dad is, and he knew what was going on. But if I had changed the locks or changed codes or any of that, my son could just have easily given them to his dad still. So I had to leave everything how it was. I was putting chairs under the doorknobs at night just to give me a little extra time in case. You know, fortunately, that divorce did happen within 3 weeks, but unfortunately, and I am finding this is very common with abusive situations, the offense of the divorce usually provokes more violence after. And I did experience that one night, about a month and a half after the divorce. He had found out I was taking a +1 to my sister's wedding ceremony. And just he came to the door in the middle of the night after leaving threats in my email, threats on my voicemail, and my son wanted to go out and deal with him, and I just froze. I was just paralyzed. But my son came back in, put his head in his hands, and said, "I would have never forgiven Dad if he stabbed you with that knife." And that scared the heck out of me. But my son said, "Don't call the cops. I told you never call the cops." He didn't want to be that kid that in this small town that everybody knew everybody, that, "Oh, what happened to your dad? Your dad's a loser. Your dad's in jail." 3 nights later, my son went out with some of his friends. They were out a little late. I went to sleep. And again, it's that ring doorbell. 15 minutes after my son left, who's outside my bedroom window, yelling all kinds of profanities, calling me vulgar names. I ignored it. And the next thing I knew, I heard gunshots. I heard at least 3. I don't know if there were more because honestly, everything just kind of goes blank. I went from being in the bed to I'm in the corner of the room away from the windows on the phone with 911, hysterical, because where we live, it takes county cops about 45 minutes, and I wouldn't have had that much time. But there were 6 squad cars that showed up. They did not arrest him. They did not charge him. They did not even remove him from the property, because in the amount of time that he had before they got there, he confiscated the gun, the shells, any evidence. This man wasn't even wearing shoes. He was drunk, clearly. Even the police admitted it, but they said they couldn't arrest him, even though that property was, the title and the deed were only in my name. They could not remove him. They had no reason to remove him unless I had video proof, they said. And I said, well, what did women in the 1960s do when there was no, I wasn't standing at the window when he's shooting a gun, wanting me dead, with my phone to video him. I was a little worried. I was on the phone with you guys with 911, and they said, well, without video evidence, we can't prove it. And he's saying he didn't do it. But he's here, barefoot and drunk.
So how did you finally get him out of your life? Because you were already divorced from him at that point.
Yes.
But that wasn't the issue. The issue is the man is shooting at you, right?
Yes, I went to court. Then that was on a Saturday night. That was actually sweetest day of 2020. And yeah, day I'll never forget. I went to the courthouse again first thing Monday morning, because I had gone there after the knife incident, even though my son said don't involve the cops. I just filed, a little report. I didn't have them do anything, but I wanted to keep some record at this point. I went Monday. The judge said she did not see any reason that I was in danger, denied my request for an emergency order of protection. I was able to appeal it. So I got another court date. She said, bring witnesses. And so I reached out to, everybody has a certain amount of acreage. Everybody's got little farms, but I reached out to one neighbor that I had been friendly with years before, but I had stopped because he didn't like me being friends with anybody. And And she said, yeah, we heard the gunshots. She said, we even thought about coming over there, but he had shot our dog a few years before, shot our dog in the neck, and we were afraid that he'd come and shoot us or our kids. And so she said, we saw the cops, so we were hoping you were okay. And I said, well, explain the situation. She said she would come into court. And when she did, her testimony, he had apparently been over at their house for a bonfire a few weeks before and told everybody there that he was planning on killing me. So, so I got my order of protection. But again, I know it's like a soap opera. It's a wonder that I'm okay. The order of protection, so that I was granted, he couldn't come within 10 feet of me. And I said, with all due respect, Your Honor, he could throw a 2x4 at me. I am 90 some pounds. From 10 feet away, he could hurt me with a 2x4. Really. He could throw a knife at me. He could probably throw a fork at me if he was a good shot. 10 feet. And she said, well, I'll put a no contact order as well. Well, by that afternoon, he had already violated that. He left a note on my windshield, and it wasn't anything significant. He was just testing me to see if I would call on it. Because if I called on this note that meant nothing, then my son would be mad at me and probably never talk to me again. And so here I was back in the situation where he was showing me that nothing I could do could stop him from doing whatever he wanted to do. So,
fast forward a little bit. How did you, because now you have broken the cycle. You have gotten away from him. How did that happen? What did you have to do, like both internally in your own head and externally, to finally break the chain from him and get him out of your life?
Well, truthfully, it was just, I felt like I did not want to stay in that house. It was not, I had no sentimental attachment to it like most people do to a home they'd been in 17 years. It's where I raised my son. I was trying to be respectful of the fact that he was in his senior year of high school and wanted him to have some stability and consistency. But for me, I mean, once we got past the new year, I just had this itch. I talked to my son and I said, I know I said we should stay here till you're done with school. That's what you wanted. But I think we just need to move on. Let's start fresh. I had a longtime friend, who had been my plus one at that wedding. And I'd known his family 16 years. So there wasn't really courtship or anything. We were very good friends. And so we decided we would get married. So we were going to go be with him anyway. So it just worked out really well that my son already knew him. Everybody knows everybody. It's all good. My son said, yes, let's sell this house. And I feel like that was the factor, was just getting out of there. Even if it would have just been me and my son going off on our own, it was separating ourselves from that property. Because I think at that point, then my ex could see like we didn't have anything that he couldn't have, if that makes any sense, because I think he saw us remaining there only because I was the only one who financially was able to keep the house. He didn't have a job, so he couldn't, take the mortgage on his own. But I think he saw once we weren't in the house that he felt was his, it lightened things, but he had also moved on and found somebody else that he, just like me, moved in very quickly, moved in her kids. So his attention was directed elsewhere, and stayed away from me. But certainly being in a new place where we have cameras, we are protected, we're safe. I think he knows he can't get away with the things that, that he could back at our old house.
So what would you, at this point, from where you sit now, because you've been on your own journey, you've healed, you are now happily remarried.
Yes, very much so, and healthy. Most importantly, being out of that atmosphere. I've put on weight. I look like a normal human being and not a Halloween skeleton anymore. And And I don't even know the last time I used my breathing machine. I'm doing very well physically. I don't have all these autoimmune things happening constantly. So it really, it's just getting out of that toxic situation. It just drags you down. My advice, honestly, in retrospect, the irony is my biological father is a retired Chicago cop. So he had been very stressed as well, seeing me in this situation, because he said the paper trail is so essential. And so when he was seeing me be denied these order of protections and such, he understood it because he's seen it happen, but he also understood that a lot of situations that start out as domestic issues do end up in murder. He said a lot of the murder scenes they come on usually started as domestic that were never reported. So I think the main thing for me, I think it was essential that I kept that notebook hidden at home, just in case. But if I had to go back and do anything, I would probably have been leaving that paper trail with the authorities, because I think that night he shot the gun, if they could look back and say, oh, we have all these, these 10 other incidences, they probably would have removed him from my property instead of leaving him there, because I wasn't going to stay there, obviously, with this crazy person shooting a gun outside my window. I left the house in the middle of the night. It was not safe for me.
Yeah. So, Dana, thank you so much for sharing
course.
your story. It is so powerful, and it's such an important message for people to hear, that there are things that they can do. And the strategy that you made, the decisions you made along the way to save up the money,
Yes.
to keep the journal, it was as if you were listening to your intuition in spite of yourself.
Yes.
And doing the things that ultimately enabled you to break free. And then once you did that, to get to the point where you could start the healing journey,
Exactly.
to move past it, so that you didn't do the same thing again and didn't end up in a similar relationship or situation. So
exactly.
Your message is so important. And I want to talk just for a second, because I know we're out of time, about your book.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that, where people can find it, and the prequel and the sequel that you're also writing?
Yes, I am in the process of trying to get those. They're written. We're just going through revisions and edits and all that fun stuff. So hopefully by next year, we'll have those out next summer at the latest. But Gasping for Air, The Stranglehold of Narcissistic Abuse is available anywhere you buy books online. We can also access it on my website, danasdiaz.com. There's also a quiz on there you can take to see if you're in a situation where you're experiencing abuse or narcissistic abuse specifically. I have a blog where I share some extras. Other podcasts, including this one, will be on my press room page. But certainly I ask people to reach out, Facebook and Instagram, or even to you as well. We just want to be able to provide resources. And my biggest message to anybody listening that can relate to anything I've said, whatever your situation, I am promising you, you will have shelter for you and your children. There are even people that foster pets for victims of abuse. There are food pantries and churches that offer meals to families. You will not go starving. You will not go without shelter. You will have clothing and you will be okay. I am telling you, I never imagined that my life was one that would be worth living. And I am standing here telling you, I'm so glad that I sought it through and went through with everything, because I am so fulfilled and so happy and healthy, and I'm safe. So please, if anybody does have a safe opportunity to remove yourself from a situation that's not good for you and or your children, please just consider it and think about how you can make a change for yourself.
Dana, thank you so much for sharing your story and all of the, everything that you went through. And again, for everyone listening or watching, You can find Dana at Dana S. Diaz. Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
DanaSDiaz.com. Get a copy of her book, Gasping for Air. Dana, thank you so, so very much. I really appreciate your having the courage to come on and tell your story.
Thank you so much.